Imagine waking up to find out that your home, the place where you've built memories and invested years, could be taken away. That's the reality for residents on Toronto's Pape Avenue, facing expropriation by Metrolinx. In this episode of Money Mindset Mastery, we dive deep into the expropriation process with top experts, a seasoned lawyer, an experienced real estate appraiser, a local mortgage broker, and a homeowner directly impacted. Together, we unravel what expropriation means, the financial and emotional toll, and what homeowners can do to protect their rights. Stay tuned to understand how this affects you and how to navigate these challenging waters.
Wake up, it's time to rise. Talking money with sharp insight. Jim and Ryan here to guide. Mastering the money ride. Saving stacks and planning dreams. Living large by honest means. Tune in now for the schemes. Breaking down financial themes. Money mindset every day. Mastering.
I'd like to welcome everyone to the Money Mindset Mastery podcast. I'm your host, Jim, and joining me today is my co-host, Ryan Genoe. Ryan, how are you today?
I feel like I'm having deja vu, but I feel like also at the same time, we're having a bit of the feeling of the Brady Bunch intro with so many people on our podcast today. So big, important topics.
You're right, and we have people dropping off too for unknown reasons. So if it happens again, we'll just keep going. But yeah, today we're talking about navigating expropriation. Many people don't know what that is, and we're going to dive into a specific process that's happening right now with people in Toronto on Pape Avenue that are currently going through the process. But we do have some special guests joining us today, so I'm going to go through the list, and then we will have one-on-one conversations, obviously. So first on the list is Ava Kanner, expropriation lawyer with Davies House, specializing in guiding clients through the expropriation process. Ava, thank you for joining us. Ward Lansink, senior real estate appraiser with expertise in property valuations, especially in expropriation context. So Ward, thank you for joining us as well. The next person you have heard and seen before, our business partner, Sonia Kociper of TVH Legal. But she also is one of the property owners on Pape Avenue who's currently going through the process. So we're going to discuss the impact that she's going through right now. So Sonia, thanks again for joining us. And then finally, you've also seen and heard John Sowerby, TVH Mortgages, our business partner. And he's going to basically talk about or provide some insights on the financial considerations for the affected homeowners. John, thanks again for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So the purpose of this episode is we want to explain the importance of understanding the expropriation process, particularly for the residents on Pape Avenue, and potential impact on their homes and financial situations. So I think we'd like to start off with Ava. Many people don't know what an expropriation is, what their rights are, or anything for that matter when it comes to the expropriation process. So perhaps you can high level explain what that is, and then we can dig a little bit deeper into the individuals that are going through that process on Pape Avenue.
Of course, my pleasure. So thanks very much for inviting me to participate in this. The last time I spoke about expropriation to a group, my first slide said, I'm here from the government and I'm not here to help you. And that's kind of the feeling when it comes to expropriation. Essentially, expropriation is the taking of land from an owner without that owner's consent. The law gives a government authority the right to do that, and the concept is that the land is being taken by the authority for public use and benefit. Fortunately, the Expropriations Act is designed to make the process fair, because you are a minnow, in a sense, in a small pool with a killer whale, and without the expropriations legislation, you would have very little chance of getting anywhere in terms of your compensation. But the Act provides a process for the taking and a process for the compensation that's given to each of the owners. And the goal of the Act is to put the owner in the same position as if the expropriation had not taken place. I can tell you that that is a laudable goal. That's what we try to achieve. It doesn't happen perfectly in every file, but it is nonetheless the goal that we strive for. So it's nice that it's there as a kind of a background rule. The expropriation starts with a bunch of very formal procedures. Frankly, most people aren't really interested in all of that, but just for your own edification, it starts with the notice of application for approval to expropriate, which gives the expropriating authority, so for example, in this case, Metrolinx, the permission that it requires from the lieutenant governor in order to expropriate a person's property. There are a bunch of other procedural items that are in the Act, but for the purposes of this podcast, I don't think anybody's interested in that, and frankly, it's not that all that helpful to you. What you should know is that although the expropriation is a very formal process, and the expropriating authority must be held to the deadlines that it must fulfill under the Act, the fact of the matter is that many expropriations are conducted through negotiated settlements, or very often it can be a negotiation before the expropriation even takes place. In the case of the Ontario line and other similar projects which are being conducted under the transit-oriented communities legislation, you have even fewer rights under the procedural side of it. So the incentive to negotiate with the authority, either an interim solution or a final solution, is enhanced. So, for example, before an expropriation, very often the authority will make an offer. It will usually have some kind of incentives, and we negotiate for other things that we want, so that if, for example, the property is a residence and people are living in that home, we try to negotiate sufficient provisions that will allow for a seamless transition between the expropriated property and the new property that the person is going to be living in. Something that everybody always asks is, can you stop this? And the answer is no, you cannot stop it. The best you can do is delay it, and even then, with the Transit-Oriented Communities Act, your ability to delay it is even reduced. So you can't stop it. The best thing to do is to try to negotiate the best deal that you can, whether it's before they expropriate or after they expropriate. If there is a negotiated settlement, the owner consents to the acquisition of the land, which allows the authority to become the owner of the land without following the formal requirements of the expropriations. And very often these are partial settlements where we deal with the compensation for the taking and not the other things that fall off the table as a result of the expropriation. So, for example, easy example is moving costs. So we won't necessarily know that when we negotiate the compensation for the market value of the property. And so certain of those things can be left off the table to be negotiated later. And that allows people to have the money up sort of earlier in the process to allow them to move forward with relocating. So essentially, we're talking about a negotiated partial settlement without prejudice to the right to claim for the balance of the expropriating, the balance of the damages suffered from the expropriation. If you have one of these agreements, whether it's before or after the expropriation, we also negotiate for the possession, because under the Act, the expropriating authority could theoretically take possession 3 months after the service of what's called a notice of possession. Once you're into a negotiated agreement, all of that kind of falls off the table. You don't have to worry about it. But let's just say you don't have a negotiated settlement. They can't take possession until they've served you with what's called a Section 25 offer, which is a formal offer of compensation, which the owner is free to accept without prejudice to the owner's rights to say it's not enough money, which is one of the things that is in the Expropriations Act to make it easier on owners. The ability to accept that amount, it's called the Section 25 Offer B. It's usually less than the Section 25 Offer A, because the A would be a full and final settlement. We would never tell you to take the full and final settlement at that point unless it was a crazy amount, and that doesn't happen. So the B is usually a lower amount, and it doesn't deal with all the other sort of external things that I've been talking about. I'm going to leave to assessment of market value that subject to Ward, because that's his area, and I rely on him, for that information, regardless of whether it's in a podcast or in a file. But I would like to add one thing that's kind of important, and that is that the Expropriations Act also provides that reasonable costs which are incurred as a result of the expropriation are reimbursed by the expropriating authority. What does that mean? That means you're going to need a lawyer. I always recommend that whoever you retain, it be a lawyer who doesn't just dabble in expropriations, because expropriations, even though it's not neurosurgery, has its own complexities. So you retain a lawyer, that lawyer will retain an appraiser, and those costs are ultimately reimbursed by the expropriating authority. They don't do that because they want to. They do that because the law forces them to reimburse reasonable costs. The question of what's reasonable is the thing that people may argue about later on. Reasonable, I've never had an issue with this, but I can give you an example of what wouldn't be reasonable. If I and I had 3 other senior lawyers in my office on one file, that would not be considered reasonable. So anybody who practices in the area understands that, and they act within the parameters of how it actually works. In addition to compensation for the market value of the property that's being taken, if there's a business there, you might be entitled to business losses. You might be entitled to increased operating costs if you're moving the business to a new location because you have no choice. You would be entitled to relocation costs, legal, survey, advertising, storage costs, depreciation of machinery, for example, that can't be moved and has to be reacquired. So it's a very large list, and basically only limited by your imagination in terms of what you can probably claim. The rule being that essentially anything that results from the expropriation is something that you can claim against the expropriating authority. For residential properties, the law provides that in addition to market value and other damages, so for example, the moving cost is a good example, owners are entitled to 5% of the market value for inconvenience and the cost of finding another property. Sometimes there can be an allowance for improvements that are not reflected in the market value of the property that is being expropriated. So for example, if somebody had a disability and needed to make the new property wheelchair accessible in the way that the old property was, that would be something that we would add onto the claim. There are double costs. There are claims for the double carrying costs on financing. So if you're in 2 properties at the same time, or if there's a mortgage against the expropriated property and there's a discharge fee, if somebody has to rent on an interim basis, there would be a claim for that. Simple things like reconnecting your phones, although I don't think anybody has a landline anymore, but if they did, that, gas, those sort of things that would be claimable. In addition to the things that I've spoken about, the Act provides that owners are paid interest on the market value and injurious affection. I haven't spoken about injurious affection. I think I'm going to leave it aside because I don't think it's going to be of tremendous interest to the viewers. But from on the market value, the interest that is set out in the Act is 6% per year, calculated from the date the owner ceases to reside on or make productive use of the lands. So in some cases, and particularly when we were in a very low interest environment, I had clients who said, "Nah, I'm not going to accept Section 25 offer because I can't get 6% anywhere. I'm going to let it sit with the expropriating authority and let it earn 6% for a while until I take the money." In this environment, that's probably less of interest, but it's important to know that the offers do bear interest at 6% from a particular time. In terms of the costs, the reimbursements of costs, it's just something to flag. If you enter into a settlement without the necessity of a hearing, then reasonable costs, as I've said, are reimbursed, and very nearly 100% in most cases, or 100% in all cases, or very nearly 100% in all cases are reimbursed. That rule changes if you have to go to a hearing. But I can tell you that at least 95% of files settle, and 95% of files should settle, because the arguments over compensation and market value are based on opinions. And as much respect as I have for Ward Lansink and all the other appraisers that I work with, essentially it's just an opinion. So an opinion, unless the expropriating authority is being incredibly unreasonable, your appraiser's opinion is just one opinion. And you would not want to go to a hearing without giving the file a real chance to settle, because there's no guarantee when you go to a hearing. There's always risk associated with allowing a third party to make a decision which binds the owner and the expropriating authority. So mostly they're negotiated settlements. Sometimes you can't negotiate a settlement, and then you can go to a mediation, which is an important step in the process. And if it doesn't negotiate, if things don't settle during the sort of informal process, they largely settle during the formal process, which is the mediation. One other thing, again, just high level, owners have an obligation to mitigate. That's actually a legal concept that applies to every claim for damages, even if you fall on the street and bang your knee. The obligation to mitigate is to reduce the amount of damages rather than to increase the amount of damages. And the nice thing about that is that any proper step taken to mitigate damages is compensable. So, for example, if you are running a business and you have an obligation to try and look for a new location for that business. You can't just say, "Well, you're taking my property, I'm closing my business, and you now owe me $100 million." But if you do take steps to relocate your business, and that costs you money because you have to sign a lease and you're paying double rent for a period of time, that would be a proper step within the process of mitigation, and you would be entitled to add that to the claim. So sorry, that was kind of a lot of diverse information in a short period of time. I hope it was clear. I've left out a lot of stuff in the process, but hopefully you got the gist of it, and we can fill in whatever gaps you have at the end of the podcast.
I think really what you've done here is you've highlighted the importance of someone not handling this challenge on their own.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're a part of the process, right? We're gonna move on to the next part of the process where Ward comes in. But honestly, this is a really good indication that don't try to do this through Google or ChatGPT. Hire a professional. Let them help you through the process.
Jim, and I would add to that, and it's it's a small expropriations bar. But I would add to that, hire a lawyer who does, again, yes. I said, doesn't dabble, and I mean it, because there are intricacies that that make it difficult for people who are just generalists to deal with this. In addition to which, people who do what I do have a team, a team of people that I call on, that I trust, that I know are reputable, that do good work, to be able to shepherd owners through the process and get them the best result, essentially.
That's
Okay,
great.
I'll shut up now.
Well,
Takes a
Ward,
village.
you can step in now and maybe discuss your role and how you assist people who are going through the process, because I'm sure it's not a simple process.
No, it's not. And again, thank you very much for inviting me on the podcast. Happy to have a chat. I think Ava did a great job of giving the high-level rundown of how the expropriation process works. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance and intricacies of the act, and also the interaction between a property owner, their team, and the authority, and also their team. But I think Ava said it well, is that this is a nuance, and there is specialty required here. And so I'm one of those people that come into the team to help with that specialty. And so as a real estate appraiser, I've got a lot of experience dealing with expropriation, with, let's say, simple and complicated expropriations. Your intro, Jim and Ryan, was mainly about the folks on Pape that are going through acquisitions related to the Ontario line. As Sonia knows, that is what we refer to as a full taking or a full buyout. And so the complexity of those may be minimalized. That said, there are situations where the authority comes in and takes a small portion of a property or a large portion of a property and leaves what we call a remainder. And those situations can be obviously much different and more complicated. And just like myself, there may be a variety of other experts brought on. And that's the team that Ava refers to, is that in this case, with those on Pape, we might have a small team, but then when we get into other expropriations, the team grows as the expertise is required. So obviously, as a real estate appraiser, I'm here to give an opinion as to that of market value. Market value is the first, let's call it, head of compensation within the Expropriations Act. There's a specific definition within the Expropriations Act, very akin to that of the standard definition of market value. The main nuance, or the main undercore there, is that it is an objective and independent opinion, and that's the role that we obviously take here. So if I'm working for a property owner or working for an authority, we have to take that role where we come in and provide an opinion as though you're putting a for sale sign in the front of that property and responding to what the market is and what the market is saying and doing, and attracting value too. Now, there's obviously, in addition to that, other aspects of a claim. If there's a relocation element or a disturbance damage element, we can assist with those. But our first, I guess you could say, mandate here, especially with those along Pape, is to ensure that market value represents that of the home. The authority will give their opinion. As Ava said, that's sort of how the process starts. The authority comes in, provides their opinion by their appraisal team, and then the property owner has their ability to look to someone like myself to assist with our opinion. Now, as with any opinion, there's differences. A lot of times when we get into what we're looking at Pape, hopefully there's not much difference of opinion, because we're basically looking at the same type of property into the same market, looking at the same sales, the same data sets, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, there's going to be nuance when we look to what those individual requirements of the property may be relocating, et cetera. But that's really the first test there. Now, as Ava said, there's other elements of injurious affection, all this sort of, not necessarily applicable here in the case of Pape. Okay, so as part of the team that Ava and others put together, I'm there to assist the property owner to understand what their value is, but again, remaining in my seat of objectivity and independence to ensure that I'm not overstretching and I'm not an advocate. That's definitely not my role. My role is to make sure that the property owner is reflective of market value and compensation, to ensure that the intent of the act is there. And the intent is there to reinstate a property owner into a similar situation, but for the expropriation. In the industry, you like to say that this is to make them whole. And so if they've got a bundle of goods, we try to make sure that that same bundle of good is set forth into the transition. Okay. So I think that's my role. I'm happy to, obviously chat a little bit more. I know that everyone is going through it. It's an emotional process. Obviously, this is pretty invasive as a process to a property owner. Those along Pape are primary residence holders, the majority of them. There are some there that are investors and landlords and tenants. However, the majority of them are primary residence holders, and we as Canadians hold our primary residence, very close to our concerns. And so that's also part of the expropriations process. The authority is fully aware of that. And the good part is, I think that the Expropriations Act here in Ontario, obviously we have a federal act as well, and we have different acts through each province or pieces of legislation in each province. But the Ontario Act does its best, as I think that's correct and reasonable to say, Ava, in the fact that the Ontario's Act is outlined to ensure as best an outcome it can be for a property, notwithstanding it could be very emotional, frustrating, and somewhat tiring. But that's also just the way these roll in these situations.
And I think, Sonia, you could probably speak to the emotional aspect of it, although you're not, you own property as an investor, but there is an impact to you. And I recall one of the first things you did when you found out about your property being one of the 25, I believe, that's out there. Your call came to me and it went to John, because the questions were, what's my impact from a retirement point of view, financial point of view, and if I decide to purchase another property, how do I go ahead
I think we
and get
lost
financing
Jim,
for
but
that property?
I know what he's going to say next because I was the one asking the questions. The shock of learning about this was real, even though I'm an investor and may not seem as impacted because now I don't have to uproot and move my home and my family. That was my home. There was a big connection to the property. I lived there for several years. It became my investment property, where it became part of my retirement plan. And it was very much a critical part of my life. And it was a huge shock. And it was the next question was, what do I need to do next, and who am I going to contact so that I can get some guidance on how to move forward in this very strange situation that I just found myself in. When you own property, you never think that one day that it's going to be expropriated. Not in a million years did I think that. And even with Pape, the subway line was coming through, Metrolinx was assuring us constantly that our properties would not be impacted in any way, shape, or form. And then overnight it changed. So it did come as a huge surprise.
Mm-hmm.
So I reached out to John and Jim, and I said, okay, how is this going to impact my life? How is it going to impact my retirement plan? How is this going to impact all of the things that I had set up? Because it all was around, the real estate and the growth and the equity and the property, etc. And then the second contact was Davies Howe and connecting with Ava. And I had worked with Davies Howe many, many moons ago, and knew that this was the team that I wanted to help me, but also all of the homeowners, because I do think that strength within the community is better, and we can move ahead with sort of one cohesive representative that has all the tools to ensure that we're being properly represented. So for me, I started feeling better as the process unfolded, because now I had the advice and supports of my TVH group partners, Davies Howe, representation, and I found myself in a more fortunate position, which I ultimately passed on to the group at Pape and have provided some guidance on that front as well. And a few of the homeowners have now reached out to us as well. But I think that the anxiousness, the uneasiness is very real in this process, even with someone who, has dabbled in expropriation and commercial expropriation properties. I was not prepared to take this on in any way, shape, or form. We needed qualified, expert advice here, and that's what's allowing us to move forward in the way that we are.
Yeah, and I think that's the main groove there, Sonia, is that it's an intimidating part of the process to have government reach out and say they need something from you. But it's not just like they need a tax payment or something like that. They actually need where you live, and that is very intimidating. Whether it be a full buyout or a partial, or in other contexts of commercial expropriations when we're dealing with development properties, even those as small developers are intimidated by the fact that they had made business decisions, they made financial commitments, they made they made moves within their life that they were going to see through, and all of a sudden there is a stick in the spokes and things have to change, and so it does unravel. And I think that's the importance of the team, is to make sure that all of those loose ends start to get tied up and understood. And while the Expropriations Act may not be as long as other pieces of legislation, it is nuanced and it is a specialty. And so, working with those that know it is super important for any property owner.
So
Absolutely.
there's essentially nothing more upsetting than this that I have discovered. So we do spend a fair amount of time trying to put people at ease. Sonia, you're in a very privileged position that this is no longer your residence and you're holding it as an investment property. Although there are repercussions, it does affect your plans. But it is terribly upsetting when you're actually living in the house. I've had people crying that they were in their forever home, and older couples who've been there for 30 or 40 years, and assumed that they were going to die in those homes, and have put a lot of themselves into those homes. So it's terribly, terribly upsetting, and we understand that. The problem is there's nothing to be done about it except make a good deal and try and make it as seamless, as I've said, and as easy as possible.
And that's the part that for me, because everyone on the street, I just live around the corner now, but everyone on the street were my neighbors, and I knew most of them, and we saw children grow up together and all the likes. So it became very much a community, and that's the part that hit me the hardest. Like, where are these families now moving? In light of the climate, the market, in light of everything that's going on, how are they going to afford this? What's going on? And that's why it was so important to me to reach out to them with, referring them to my team, because they're ultimately going to be the ones who are advising me. And I'd love to share that with them as well, because it did provide me, like I said, with a little bit more ease. And although it does become a financial thing at the end of the day, through the process, it's not. It's a very emotional thing, right? Yes, it's about what's going to be the best dollar outcome, and in order to continue on in owning property or doing, reaching the next goals. But it was very interesting because we had the appraisers come out from Metrolinx and talk about, being indifferent to the situation, because one of the appraisers was very sensitive to the situation. The other one says, well, the government needs to develop. We're in a growing city, so you should just accept it as that. And I was like, wow, I don't live here, but if she said that to somebody else, I think they would have, not been so kind, I think. So there has to be a little bit more education from Metrolinx on how to deal with people.
Frankly,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's my little rant, but as a homeowner, and I'll move on.
It's actually surprising because I have found that most people are understanding. So I don't know who this person is, but they have a ton of work at the moment, they are stretched beyond description. So it may be that they
Yeah.
have quite a number of new people who are involved in some of these files, and it may take them a while to get up to speed on what they should be doing.
Absolutely. A little more education, I think, on that front.
Yeah, well, I think that's the kicker there, Sonia, is the education. And the group here on this podcast, is part of that team to provide that education. The word expropriation, most Canadians don't have to deal with it, never hear about it, maybe read about it, but don't understand the full process of it. So as Ava said, we do a lot of work with the property owners to understand. It's an intimidating process, like we've said, and so part of that is just knowledge. And so working for a team, for a property owner going through it, a lot of our time is spent to educate and reassure that the goal of the process is to make one whole. And that emotional support can be sometimes easy, and it can be sometimes very difficult, because like Ava said, you may have a property owner that has a health concern that needs to be located close to family, needs to be close to medical care. And they're now obviously going to have to reroute and do something different, and also maybe make decisions that are far sooner than one may have had to consider without the expropriation. And so I may be extending a little bit beyond my full role as the appraiser, but that being said, I am there to help educate them on the process, and also to maybe bear some reality in terms of the types of compensation claims that one can sit within the Expropriations Act. But these are all questions that we deal with on a regular basis. Where it's like, well, can I get compensated for this, and can I be considered for that, et cetera? So there is, like I said, a huge unfortunate knowledge process for those that come across their first expropriation.
Yeah.
So the other
Absolutely.
thing
My
that,
internet
sorry, we're not giving you a
dropped
chance
out. So sorry, I was just going to say my
That's
internet
okay. We
dropped
took
out.
over.
So I'm tethering right now. So can you bring me up to speed of where we're at right now?
we've just been generally chatting about the process and how difficult it is for people, and not only the understanding but the emotional side of it, et cetera, et cetera. That's been the tenor of it. And it actually leads me into one other thing that we should talk about. And I think, Sonia, you've mentioned this before. But the fact that all of these homes were being taken at the same time on Pape created a unique problem for the owners. So it wasn't just a question of how much compensation are we entitled to and how much are we entitled to for damages. Where are we going to live? Because if one house is taken and somebody wants to stay in that area, okay, fine, there might be something for sale. But here you have, is it 25 owners, all of whom would like to stay in the area and are all going to be looking for homes at the same time. In this particular market, and frankly, in any Toronto market, I don't see that as working out easily. So people, there's not a lot for sale in the area. I think Ward can give us the statistics on that. And what there is for sale, those owners are going to know that there are 25 people, or a percentage of 25 people, who are going to be vying for those homes. And is it not going to increase the market value of those homes so that people,
Absolutely.
you may end up in getting into a bidding war if you want to stay in the geography. So it's a very unique problem to the Pape Street owners who live there.
And that'll be amongst, like, that bidding war is amongst ourselves. And with that said, that's why we turn to yourself and Ward to understand, how we can stagger this. What solutions can we create if there's an increase because of the inherent uniqueness of having 25 homeowners now out on the market. How is that being compensated? So these are all the things rolling around in homeowners' minds. And I think this also leads to, the financial challenges as well. I think John is more able to speak to of these situations.
Yeah, I think this is something that we question John about, right? Because there could be potentially an opportunity now if they're being expropriated, they're giving the offer, if they accept the offer, rates are what they are. We know they're going to start going down. This might be a good opportunity for someone to get back into the market fairly quickly. Our concern was what happens during that period of time between actually receiving funds to be able to buy a new piece of property. And John, I'll bring you in now here because you had indicated there might be some options available to those individuals. So maybe you can kind of share what those potential options are.
Yeah, it's always difficult to say without more information, but the bottom line is we're probably in a position right now where rates have started to come down but have not yet bottomed, such that there may be some potential for people to get in at a better time as purchasers than where we might be perhaps 6 months or a year from now. The difficulty, of course, remains with the fact that this expropriation, I guess, from the perspective of the current homeowners, won't really put them in a position where they see funds for some time yet. There are a few ways to potentially approach this. A lot of it, which makes it a little bit difficult on the podcast, are going to be, somewhat unique to the circumstances of the people who own those properties. But there are ways to try and stretch things out, whether it's through bridge financing, whether it's accessing equity that they already have, depending on age of the people. For example, one of the things that I know I had wondered about is what happens to those who maybe do need some financing, but maybe aren't in the same financial circumstances they were when they purchased the property, or perhaps might have trouble with some of the new qualifying rules that have come in over the last few years. Some of those who are potentially a little bit older, you can do things like purchase properties with reverse mortgages. I mean, there are a variety of possible situations that can be worked through, but most of them, again, depend on the circumstances of the individual. Some of them will be a little bit more straightforward. If you've got a couple who work and are pretty much doing the same job that they were doing a few years ago and are looking to move to a property that's more or less the same, there are hopefully some fairly straight lines we can draw for them to get them from point A to point B. But for others who maybe don't have the same circumstances under which they purchased, or who are in a position where, their situation has changed, and as to your point, from an emotional perspective, they're dealing with all of that as well. It may be a little bit more complicated, and as a result, it may be a little bit more difficult. But again, there are options available. Really, a lot of it will boil down to, sort of let's have a conversation and see what your goals are, and then see, based on the information that we have available, what can be done. I think that the general message I would sort of, close on is there are things that can be done. That's the important thing to keep in mind. But my usual suggestion to people is it's better to start that process sooner than later, because I would personally rather be in a position where I had all of the appropriate information and decided not to proceed than get to a point where I wanted to proceed and realized I didn't have the appropriate information.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's another
just
part
to
of it.
add to that,
Go ahead, Sonia. You can add to it.
just starting now means that there's not going to be perhaps that struggle between all of the homeowners at the same time to buy similar properties. Starting now, like having the discussion allows you the opportunity of a little bit more time to then make decisions based on the information that you do have, and the market as it's changing may not be as much of an impact. This is why we say, start now.
Yeah, for
Sorry,
sure.
Jim.
And I also think one of the discussions that Ryan and I have been having with individuals dealing with this is also the financial retirement discussion. What is the impact is this going to have on their retirement, and will they be able to retire? Is it going to improve? It's going to make it worse? So those are things that we're also working through with some individuals as well, to provide them hopefully some comfort in understanding what their future will look like from a financial point of view. So those are things that we encourage people to and reach out to us to talk to us about, and we can help them through that process as well.
And in relation to that last point, one of the clients asked me whether or not the costs associated with the financial planner would be claimable under the Expropriations Act. And I'd never actually encountered that before. And I said, well, probably not, but tell me why you need a financial planner. And then they explained that the house was an integral part of their financial plan. And now they need to redo their financial plan. And so I think that's entirely claimable. I mean, I never offer a warranty, But it seems to me that that would be an actual direct result of having your home expropriated from you, and therefore I will make the claim. And I think there's a very good argument that those fees should be reimbursed.
Yeah, well, many Canadians, the bulk of their wealth is tied into their principal residence, and they are relying on the equity that they've built into that home to help them with their retirement planning. So they do need to have
Right,
an
and they were
understanding of
counting
the
on a
impact.
particular amount of appreciation over the next 5 years, which they won't have. So related
Exactly.
to that, and I don't want to monopolize the subject, but the conversation, but related to that issue is something that we haven't touched on, which I think we should touch on in relation for the people on PAPE. So the Expropriations Act gives an expropriated owner the right of first refusal to the extent that the expropriating authority declares the land that has been taken or the property that has been taken surplus to their needs. In other words, they took too much or they don't actually need it. In this case, it's, are these houses going to fall down when they come under with their tunnel boring machines, Yorkie and Torquay or Holy and Moly, whatever they're going to be called this time? Um, the the ordinarily under the Expropriations Act, the expropriated owner has the right of first refusal to repurchase based on the market value of the property at the time of the repurchase. Now, that doesn't do anybody any good because the way the Expropriations Act is structured is that when Ward does his appraisal report, he has to appraise the property without taking into consideration the impact of the new Ontario line. So if the house is worth $100 today, maybe with the Ontario line and a station right nearby, it'll be worth $125. The appraised value under the Expropriations Act is the $100. The Expropriations Act would have let you buy it back at $125 whenever it turned out that they didn't need it anymore, or in this case, the houses survived the tunnel boring machines. But what's happening here, and so far what we're seeing, and Ward thinks it's because of work that we've done in the past, what we're seeing is that the Metrolinx offers are allowing people to repurchase the homes, if possible, at some future date, but at the price at which they were taken, which is a tremendous change from what the Act provides. And kudos to Metrolinx for recognizing how unfair it would have been for them to make their offers based on the actual wording of the Act. So it's something that people will have to think about. It's not a perfect solution because we don't know when those houses are going to be safe. First of all, we don't know if they're going to be safe. Second of all, we don't know when they're going to be declared safe, if they are safe. And it could be in 3 years from now. In the meantime, people have to live somewhere. So, are they going to...
But also,
Go ahead, Sonia.
Sorry, sorry. I thought you were...
So, do they want to rent for 3 years to take the chance that they'll be able to buy the house back? Do they want to not take that chance because they're worried that the market is going to be higher in 3 years' time? I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into that. And I guess from that perspective, a financial planner would also be helpful because there are questions that are outside of the scope of what I do.
And also, I think to add to that is, what are the conditions of the homes when we do buy back? And does Metrolinx compensate for the fact to bring them back up to a state of livable condition? Because that's what they were when we moved out.
Right.
And they're going to be abandoned for 2, 3, 4 years, no running water, and there's going to be considerable damage to the properties at that point in time. So is that also?
Yeah. So far the Metrolinx hasn't come to the table on that, but that's going to be our job. That will be to negotiate agreements that, that if possible, insist upon Metrolinx doing a minimal amount of upkeep on the properties, keeping the water going, the heat going.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, it's Canada, you can't just leave a house without heat for 3 years and hope that it's going to be in good shape when you go back to it.
Raccoons and
Absolutely. We're
squirrels
glad
will
we're in
tip
your hands,
moving.
Ava.
Well,
Yeah.
well, here's a question, Avi. You'd mentioned a lot of the work that you and Ward have done is potentially being recognized now. Is it better for someone who's going through the process?
He thinks.
Uh, my guesstimate would be that's the reason behind it. But in saying that, would you suggest that a person should potentially do as some of the residents are doing right now and have hired you as a group to represent them? Or is it better to just one-on-one individually kind of address the expropriation process? I think I know the answer to this question, but I'd love to hear it from you.
So it's an excellent question, and you can imagine it's not the first time that it's been asked. I think it, particularly in this situation, that you are better off to have one person representing more, the owners. I know that some of the owners are with a different firm, and that's fine because I know who that firm is, and they'll do a good job. And I think the coincidence is that Ward has been retained by everybody. So you have one person who's doing the appraisal reports. I think it's important for us not to be competing with each other in the negotiations so that, I'm asking for, 10 things and some other lawyers only asking for 8. Why should they give us the 10 if they only want the 8? I think in this circumstance, it's better for everybody to kind of be represented in the way it's happened, which is a group. And I'm toying with the idea of having a sort of a general discussion with the lawyer who's representing the rest of the owners to see whether or not there's we have an understanding about how this is going to proceed without going into the details of each file, but just general understanding of what positions we're going to be taking so that we are not competing with each other.
That was going to be my next question to you, Ava.
Yeah, but I think though, Ava, just to separate that a little bit, Jim, as well, is, again, market value and consistency of opinion towards the market value, I think can maybe be considered through the lens of the group, right? Because everybody's looking at market value perhaps the same way. But the individual attention and care that, for instance, Sonia might be going through is different than another property owner. Brought up about the financial planning. Everybody's financial planning is independent, right? So there's some benefit for discussion as a group, but there's also a lot of important benefit to make sure that whoever a property owner is working with understands that there might be unique circumstances for compensation to be considered, right? So it's not like everybody is going to get the same financial plan and the same financial advice because of everybody's situation is different. So I think there is a little bit of an important separation there, Ava, to say that there's sometimes benefit as a group, and then there's obviously a lot of benefit to maintain your independence.
Right. And I would agree with that. There are aspects of each situation that are unique, and actually that kind of leads us into the tenants question. Because the tenants in particular do have unique situations. And they also are going to be getting offers from Metrolinx. They're going to be entitled to the same type of compensation in the sense that things that are a result of the Expropriations Act, relocation costs and the cost of moving, the cost of finding a new place, if there's a differential between the rent that they're paying now and the rent that they're going to have to pay in their new location. That's something that we would claim, but some of the owners have very unique situations. So, for example, there are people, as I mentioned earlier, that where there's a disability involved, and those people are in their own situation and they have their own unique problems that are going to need to be addressed with Metrolinx. There are individuals who are, have arrangements with their landlord where there's a kind of a they provide certain services in exchange for a rent reduction. There are people who have been in this location for a very long time and are paying way below market rent. So each of those situations is going to have to be dealt with separately. and the nature of the claims will be very different.
I think one thing that we've all learned, and I'm sure the listeners and the viewers will learn, is this is a very emotional, complicated situation. We could probably keep going on, but I think it's probably a good time for us to wind this down. However, Ava, if anyone has any questions, would
Yes.
like to get a hold of you, how can they best get a hold of you?
Well, if they Google either my name or Davies Howe, will pop up, and all of our contact information is there. So it shouldn't be an issue to find me. I'm definitely easy to find on the internet. Same thing with Ward. But I'm kind of the first place that you start, I think, when you're in this situation. So, our friend Google will provide it.
Awesome. And Ward, same thing with you?
Yeah, same thing with me. I'm easily found on the internet. I work with a great team at Robson Associates. We're a team of 8 that specialize in expropriation and other litigation-related matters. So, yeah, if anyone has any questions or comments or wants to reach out, always happy to chat. Like I said earlier, it's an education for most going through the process, and a lot of initial consultation is available just to get your head wrapped around what the process is, how to understand it, how to find a team that is available, those sorts of things. And obviously, Sonia went through that as a homeowner, going and trying to find that team as well. So, yeah.
Great. And then John, I know a lot of people.
I had a built-in team.
Yeah.
Nice. Well done.
Yeah, and to add to that built-in team, John, there's a lot of people who are going through the process who are concerned about financing and getting a mortgage. I mean, I had some of the clients who are in their 60s wondering if they can still qualify for a mortgage just based on age. So how can people get a hold of you if they have any questions surrounding the expropriation process from a financing point of view, or just generally looking for a renewal or a refinancing opportunity?
So they can check us out on the TVH Group website, so tvhgroup.ca, or they can send me an email directly at jon@tvhgroup.ca.
And Sonia, I know from a legal point of view, you're not really involved here, but you do have a legal practice. So if anyone would like to get a hold of you, how could they do that?
Yeah, so I took off my lawyer hat today and stood in as one of the homeowners, but I can also help as part of building this community of professionals that can help you through this process. I can help on the back end. So when the property is being transferred, I can help with the real estate transactions. I can also help and advise on how is this now impacting your will or your next stage in sort of your entire planning process. So if you want to get in touch with me as for the lawyer side of things, I can be reached at legal, Legal, at tvhgroup.ca, or feel free to just give us a call at the office, 647-427-8486. Happy to help.
And if you're looking for the financial advice and the impact from a financial retirement point of view, Ryan, I'll give it our number, 647-727-4668. But how else can they get a hold of us?
tvhfinancial.ca, obviously, and obviously follow us on any of the social media platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, from time to time TikTok, Dancing It Up, and many others for that matter. And to kind of wrap things up too, is like we did this podcast for about education, and it's always the important part that we've always said from the beginning of wanting to do this podcast is, this may be a small set of people right now, but there's going to be other people impacted by this. And having an amazing team like TVH Group around you, as Sonia did right away, of asking some of those general questions of how does this impact, my plan now and my plan going forward, and having the team of accountants and legal and mortgages and financial and wealth, how that can all wrap up into everybody. And it is so fascinating to me of learning through this process. Has been very quiet, the quietest I've ever been through any podcast. For that matter, how fascinating is about the information and the acts that are already in place, and that people are not aware of the importance of relying on people like Ava and Ward, and that, you can get a second opinion. These things are part of the process. That is part of your right to get this kind of support instead of going on your own and doing it. And again, just like us at TVH Group, we want to make sure people don't go do it yourself and the stresses that come with it, but instead find a particular group of people that are specializing in these particular things that can really help you succeed and take a load off. And there's so many songs I want to sing throughout our whole podcast. Anyway, so yeah.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everyone. Yeah. Well, listen, thank you everyone for your time. And Ryan, I think we're going to have another episode next week. So stay tuned. Later this week, the podcast will be sent out. The YouTube episode will be sent out, and look out for the blog post as well. So once again, thanks everyone for your time.
Why is it me? Why am I a guy? I still